It must be Thursday. Welcome to Learning Unwrapped, a talk show about your most important life skill. And today we are going to talk about making Black history count, because we know Black History Month is just a few days away. And so we want to talk about that. And we've got an awesome lineup. So let me just get started and bring in my co-host for today, who you've seen before. This is actually her third time co-hosting, Shanae Buford.
Hey!
And Shanae is our Director of Educational Equity. I feel like, Shanae, this is like Saturday Night Live when you're like, This is my third time co-host. So we've got an awesome lineup here.
Yeah, I'm excited
today. And our first guest, I like to call her the grande dame of culturally responsive teaching, because she actually first coined the phrase culturally relevant pedagogy decades ago. And she is the author of The Dream Keepers, which was a groundbreaking book in the 90s. She is also a former Kellner Family Distinguished Chair in Urban Education at the University of Wisconsin. She was the first Black woman to receive tenure there as a tenured professor. She served as the president of the National Academy of Education and the American Educational Research Association.
Wow.
And I could probably go on with 15 more cards as her life, but I like to just call her a renowned scholar and educator who really needs no introduction, educational royalty. Fun fact, she officially retired in 2018, although you would never know it by looking at her speaker lineup. Please welcome Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nancy. I'm glad to be here, and Shanae. I think you have a lot of cards because I'm old, you know?
Forget that.
Yes. So, but tell us, Gloria, what's something that you've learned this week?
Well, I learned, probably along with the rest of the world, that one of my heroes passed away, and that is Hank Aaron. So were I in the classroom, that would be something we'd be having a conversation about. All of the groundbreaking work that Hank Aaron did, not just in sports, but, you know, he started out here in Milwaukee down the road from me.
Wow.
I'm in Madison. He's Milwaukee, 72 miles east of us. But he did a lot of work in opening up housing in Milwaukee. So that was something I learned this week.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that. I love that.
Bittersweet.
Yes,
indeed. Well, rest in peace, Hank. So I'm going to bring in our second person, who is a principal in Fairfax County Public Schools at the Roanoke Elementary School. Shout out. Felicia Usher has a passion for ensuring students of every economic and social background feel supported and have the tools to achieve at high levels. And she and her staff work very hard to create an environment where they can deliver high quality instruction, building a true school community with students and families. And the exciting thing, and this is how we found her, was that she was recently selected as the Fairfax County Region 2 Principal of the Year. So shout out and applause for Felicia Usher.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yes,
very excited. Very excited.
So tell us, what's something that you learned this week?
Something I learned this week is that in the past, I have tried unsuccessfully to help my third grader with school. And it usually ends up in tears. Sometimes they're his, often they're mine. And I thought to myself, you know, that what they say about not being able to teach your own children may be true. I may have to just try to stop trying. But what I learned this week is that when it comes to music, we work out perfectly. He was learning to use his recorder. He was frustrated that he couldn't get it to work. And then I was able to model it for him and show him how to do it and show him how to cover the little holes. And we actually came together and had a positive, happy moment. So I learned that if it is music related, we can work together and it works well. And I'm very excited.
Well, isn't music the universal language?
It is.
Yes, for sure.
I mean, Renee would tell you it's math, but I think
it is math.
I might use this to then, you know, if I play the music, maybe that will help him clean his room faster. But baby steps.
Yes.
Baby steps.
Create a song.
One step at a time there.
Yes.
So we have one other guest to bring in now. I was honored to have, and some of you may have followed, and I thank you if you voted for my book, my new book, which is Reinventing the Classroom Experience, Learning Anywhere, Anytime, is going to be published in April. And I was honored to be among the top 8 vote getters, which would then be included in Book Camp PD, hashtag Book Camp PD. We'll bring that up again later. Because as I looked over the books of the other books that would be in this Twitter chat, we each have a 2-week Twitter chat. There was this very interesting book by Dr. Frederick White, The Skin You Are In, Colorism in the Black Community. And I thought, that book looks fascinating. I went to Amazon. I was just saying backstage, I don't know what we did before Amazon, and looked at the book and decided to read the book. And I'm going to join the book camp, and I hope you will too. Dr. Frederick White is a principal of Bellevue Middle School in the Shelby County system in Tennessee, school system in Tennessee, where apparently it's a little chilly down there now. He served as a leader in the educational field for over 21 years. He has also spent the past 12 years serving as an avid staff professional development instructor. And obviously, as you met, as I explained, he's author of the book, The Skin You Are In, Colorism in the Black Community. Now, that is going to be featured in hashtag Book Camp PD on March 7th and March 14th. Those are Sundays at 7:30. And do we have a banner for that we can bring up so that people can write that down, Boyd? Boyd's my director backstage. I guess we don't have that yet, but that'll come up. Please welcome to the floor here, Dr. Frederick White.
Woo!
Greetings, everyone. Greetings. Thank you for having me.
How are you?
I appreciate it. I am doing well. Loving this day.
Awesome. So tell us, Dr. White, what is something that you learned this week?
Well, I don't know if it's just this week, but realizing that I truly miss the scholars being in a face-to-face world. This virtual world for educators is something very unique. Not being able to see the kids, to just give them a pat on the back, that thumbs up, having that proximity to your kids, it does something to you. I think that all of my teachers are going through a little bit of a depression because they don't have that opportunity to be close to our scholars. So
Sure.
just realizing that is definitely a piece that we will not take for granted when we are back face to face.
For sure. I know teachers were yet to grieve the loss, I think, in this time last year, the summer and the beginning of the school year. Like, it was a loss to grieve it and recognize, sit in that feeling for a bit so that you can kind of really.
Yeah, and I think we thought that it was going to be something different. We thought that, hey, this will be, being virtual is going to be fun. And I mean, we are getting the work done.
Yes.
But there is definitely a lot of hard work in trying to keep the virtual piece going.
Right.
I like that, hard work.
Yeah. And that's, I've been, telling teachers since last March to don't focus so much on what you've lost, but focus on what you've gained. What have been the benefits of this? What are some of the things that we're doing now that we didn't do before? And how can we, I keep saying hashtag do something different. And I think, to me, when I started to think about Black History Month coming up, we always think, oh, it's Black History Month, and now we have certain activities that kids will do in school. And it really is just, with everything happening in our country, there's a big message to hashtag do something different. Like, how do we really reboot, rethink, and advance Black history as something that is infused in every moment of our day? So I thought that would be a fun topic for us to discuss and be able to toss out some ideas for our audience, whether we are talking about the classroom or parents at home or the business community. So how can we really make Black history count?
What I've been, and actually to me, it starts at Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Day, because I feel like that's the start of when you start hearing, these same popular names from civil rights. So you start, like, that's the Martin Luther King Activity Week with Rosa Parks, and those are the names you start to hear. And then we get into more of, your traditional Black history, where you learn about, Booker T. Washington, and you might get a Malcolm X in there if, the school is like really, feeling like doing something extra. But talking to teachers about, who else? Like, there's so many other things that happened within our history versus the same people that kids are hearing about all the time, and really looking at just even the day-to-day things that are occurring. I just retweeted something on Twitter. They're doing a special on the Tuskegee Airmen. Like, that's a huge part of things that happened in history that you can talk about, that doesn't have to, just live during the month of February, but is integrated in anything you're talking about. The war, that should be part of that story, what they did during that time. And so all of those different things are powerful that happened, and in different states as well. Like, how can you just integrate that into whatever the natural history conversation is? It's just that awareness of there's other folks out there that did awesome, great things, and there's folks out here doing regular, ordinary things. And it's just really should just be a part of the fabric, of what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you continue to even look at the things that are making historical marks right now, we talk about the vote that took place in Georgia. We talk about Kamala Harris. We talk about all these things that are now pieces of history moving forward that our kids are a part of,
Right.
and having them to understand why these things are so important. And not just to focus, as you said, we always focus on those individuals in history, Thurgood Marshall, Malcolm X, and our kids they just gravitate toward those individuals when they do reports. But if we make it our job to dig deep into history and to see what influences African Americans have had on this country, what influences Africans have had on the world stage, and allow our kids to explore that, I think we'll be more enriched by it. And not just do that in February. We try to make a concentrated effort to talk about the influences that Africans have had on the world culture 365. And I think it's there's a radio show, I think it's Tom Joyner in the morning, that always talks about African American history 365. And I think that's the attitude that we should have when it comes to our touch on history.
For sure.
I would just also say that it's not an either or proposition.
Right.
It is a both and one. So yes, February will be a time in which you may have an emphasis because you may actually have more resources in February, because even corporate folks are now, you're going to see more commercials. You're going to see more opportunities for things that you might use in the classroom. But as someone who taught both U.S. history and U.S. government, I actually started my U.S. history class with the question, with a picture of Fannie Lou Hamer. It's the beginning of a U.S. history class. Picture Fannie Lou Hamer. And here's the question. Does democracy work for this woman? See, I don't have to ask, does it work for George Washington? Because, rich white folks don't need democracy.
Wow.
They have enough power, influence to have their way. But if a poor Black woman, think about that, race, class, gender, is someone who can access democracy, then democracy works. Now, I might say in 2021, I might put a picture of Breonna Taylor up and say, does democracy work for her? And then we have a whole different conversation. One of the things that I've found that students are sort of frustrated with is we keep going back over the same old people. Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and it is as dull in Black as it is in white. What I've tried to do is
may they rest in peace.
And what I've tried to do is get students to look for people who are making history in their communities. Who's changing stuff here? Clearly what's happened in the Black Lives Matter makes you think differently about Black history.
I agree.
And understanding that Black Lives Matter is history in the making that they have been a part of. You know, some of my kids have actually gone and been a part of the marches. So knowing that they are now a part of history. And I love that you talk about the equity of history or the fairness of history when we think about things like the capital issue. You know, if this had been our, kids of color or individuals of color that did this, what would have happened? So thinking about that in historical terms and equity terms too. So very important.
For sure.
Jump in here.
One of the things that I'm thinking about is I remember as a student growing up cringing every time we got to Black History Month. And the reason I cringed is I was typically the only or one of only African-American students in the class. I was basically taught as a Virginian that my history started with slavery. And so we never really learned anything before slavery. And it just kind of carried on from there. And of course, everything that we've been saying, it was Martin Luther King Jr. again, Harry Tubman again, and you only knew about 5 people. And you know, the idea of it is good. Let's make a special month and make sure that we can celebrate the contributions of Africans and African Americans to this country. And it tends to turn into, if you're not careful, okay, now I have to do this thing. I have to comply because it's February. I'm going to get it out as quickly as I can. If I go over these same 5 people, because they're the only 5 people I know, I can check the box. And so one of the things that we have really focused on at our school, and I think at many schools, is really cultural responsiveness. And it's not just about that month, whether it's Black History Month, any of the other months. It's about what are the contributions that people, all kinds of people, especially Black people, have made not only to this country, but across the world. And how do we infuse that in everything that we're doing? Just like everyone has been saying, it's not just during history class, it's also during math class and science class. People have made contributions in every area. And beyond that, what are the underlying signals that we send our children to say whether or not we really believe this important? So it's one thing to say, oh yes, Black History Month, it's great. We've got our tips that are going to go out every week, and we're good, and we're going to do some activities, and we're going to learn about Martin Luther King Jr. again. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but it's also in what are the texts that you use when you're doing a read aloud for your class. Is it only certain types of books, or have you represented not only your class, but who people are in our world within the text that you pull? Are you pulling picture books that have pictures of all kinds of kids, of Black kids? They're not, it's not the book of the Black child who is struggling because they're the child of a single parent. Like a lot of the books, you look at them, you still have to scrutinize them and make sure they're not putting out an image that all Black people are struggling necessarily, but just a book. If it's a book about a boy and a dog, it's just a book about a boy and a dog, but at least you can see that that is normal for Black people too. And so I think one of the things that we have to continually look at is what are the messages that we're sending our students and our families when we say this is important. What do we really mean? Are we using the text? Are we only teaching one way and expecting all children to either learn it that way, and that means that they've accomplished it, or if they didn't do it the way that we may have done it or were taught that way to do it, it's no longer correct. You know, if I have students that really thrive on talking and they're in a class where the belief is you must be quiet in order to be a good student, there's going to be a conflict. And so we have to make sure we're honoring the cultures of our students, and not just our students, but other students. I could be at a school with with all Caucasian students. They still need to hear about Black history and understand the contributions of the people around them too. So
for sure.
So I'm really glad that Principal Usher said that, because I think that some people think that Black history is about building the self-esteem of Black children. No, Black history is about giving a corrective to the history that all of us have been taught. Amen. You don't get a January 6th, 2021 from people who understand that actually Black people have a longer heritage in this nation than most white people. The European slave trade in Africa, and I say it that way, it's not the African slave trade because they didn't get to to do it. It's the European slave trade in Africa. The transatlantic trade ended in 1848. Now, of course, they're probably smuggling some more people in, but 1848 was when it stopped coming from Africa. The majority of white people, and I would probably be willing to bet those people you saw out there on January 6th, the majority of them trace their heritage back to the Great Migration of the late 1800s to early 1900s. So we've been here. We're not a new people. And I think it is terribly unfair to send white students out into the world with misinformation, with being ignorant of their history. It's as much their history as it is our history as Black people. And so they need correct history and understanding of the nation that they call home.
For sure.
Love that.
And I would definitely also add that we have to not just teach those positive or those fluffy pieces of history. It seems like we always talk about the kumbaya moments. We'll talk about Dr. King, and we'll talk about the light and fluffy parts, but we won't talk about the resistance that he showed. And after that, he started talking about hitting the pockets of European Americans at that time is when he was assassinated. We don't talk about the Black Panthers. We don't talk about Malcolm X. So we only deal with the light and fluffy parts, those people that really talked about, hey, let's just get along or let's just be friends. We don't talk about those individuals that asked us to stand firm and stand tall for ourselves. We just want to talk about those individuals that wanted to hold hands. And no disrespect to Dr. King, who was a fraternity brother who I love to death, his memory, his history. But we have to be able to talk about all of that. We have to talk about the fact that when we talk about Abraham Lincoln as the freer of the slaves, we have to understand the Emancipation Proclamation did not free all of the slaves. It only freed the slaves in those states that were at war and that had succeeded from the Union. So we have to bring all of that in its totality and stop teaching a piece of history. So February is way too short to talk about all of the aspects of history as it relates to African Americans.
So Dr. White, did you know that only 12% of the nation actually did something in civil rights during the civil rights movement? So, people always say, I marched with Dr. King. I always say, you know what? They're not streets wide enough or long enough for all of
to get all of the people
who didn't march. 12%. So that means 88% of Americans weren't out there doing that. So contrast that with what we saw this summer, that there was much more activism and much more engagement, and that this really is not just a moment, it is a movement that we are seeing.
For sure.
And there's no one person. There's no one person. The movement is people, not one person. We don't need that one person at the forefront now. We have people who are taking this upon themselves to change the world.
Yes. And I like people from all walks of life, people from all colors coming together to say, we need to do something different here.
All right.
For sure. And I saw a comment that popped up, and it made me think about, because Christina made a comment about, a lot of even my own history or learning more about Black history as well did not come from school. It came from our parents. And I actually saw my mom had popped on here, but my dad used to take us on the most random trips. Like we stopped in Tuskegee. We stopped at Little Rock Central High School. Yeah, that's my mom right there. We stopped at Little Rock Central High School.
Shout out to Brenda.
I know. And my parents are alum of South Carolina State University. So I know a lot about the Orangeburg Massacre and know people who went through that piece of history of, like, there's a guy at my parents' church who still has the bullet in him now from that particular time in history. And so my parents were informing me of all these other different instances, these things that I was like, you don't hear about that in school. That was happening at the same time. as this, or when we used to drive from Texas to South Carolina, so through all them deep South states, that we would make these random stops of different things that happen, because my parents are very much like, you need to be informed of more than what you're being taught, here at this school level. A lot of different things have happened, and there's a lot of different books that you can read that, not as well-known authors put out things about different, instances or events that happened in history. And I think that that's very important too, to just populate your library with that, because it's not the fluffy stuff, to your point, Dr. White. The Orange Massacre is called a massacre. It ain't fluffy.
Right.
It's
right.
And Janae, bringing up the Orangeburg Massacre, I think is a good example of countering the notion that was part of the narrative of January 6th, is that this wasn't an anomaly. How could this be? Well, I had a friend call me and said, we've never seen anything like this before. I said, are you kidding me? This is exactly how the U.S. history has evolved. You go back to the Shays Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion, go back to the Wilmington
Black Wall Street,
1898, Tulsa, Rosewood. Yeah. I mean, white supremacy is that disease of the nation that when it doesn't get what it wants, it gets violent. And I think it's really important for our students to understand that this has been a pattern of behavior in the nation, and to really ask the question, what are we prepared to do about it?
Right. Yeah.
So what do you think about teaching social studies, history, the history aspect of social studies, instead of chronologically the way we tend to do it, which includes a lot of glossing over most of history?
For sure.
Really taught through themes, themes like revolution, themes like rebellion, themes like imperialism, and really dug deeply across the years. Like we were actually helping a school district design a curriculum like this at one point, where if you looked at revolution, you looked at a bunch of revolutions, because the idea is that the reason that we teach social studies and we talk about the fact that you need to learn history because history repeats itself, but we don't teach it that way. We don't teach it so that you can see, as you were just saying, Gloria, look at this. We had this rebellion, this rebellion, this rebellion. I had people saying to me, during the Black Lives Matter protests and when the statues were being toppled, like, how could you, do something to federal property? And I'm like, do you remember reading in history books about this time that these people were so upset about taxation that they had this tea party and they literally threw the tea over into the water? And people look at me like, and I'm like, here's a pattern. Like, what do people do when they get, to the point where they say enough is enough? And it happens. Like, what do you think about teaching history through themes?
Well, it's actually the way I teach. So when I teach U.S. history.
I'm sorry, Gloria, you're retired, remember?
I know, but I continue to write curriculum too. But I teach it starting with my first theme is immigration, and asking the question, well, how did we all get here? And it's an interesting story. We all have an immigration story of some sort, whether we were forced here, whether we were already here and laid claim to the land, whether we came voluntarily, whether we came to get out of debt. I mean, there are stories to be told across various races, ethnicities, and cultures. And another ongoing theme is conflict.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So
I think the idea of teaching history in terms of themes is pretty interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way before. It's definitely how science teaching has started to change. And I was a science teacher before I was an administrator. So I definitely see the connections between really looking at themes throughout history and looking for the patterns, because I feel like that's when students really start to grasp these things happen over and over and over again. And I will say the unique thing about my school is that most of our students have come from other countries. And so there are things that our kids see here on TV, things that have happened lately, and they react to it probably very different than maybe other students in other schools, because they may have just left a country that just had something similar going on, and now they're watching it in the place that they may have gone to for better opportunities. And so it's a really interesting thing here where we do a lot of asking kids what they think and what do they believe and what's right and what isn't, because they're not, their families don't have a history of the American slave trade and all of those things that have happened, because they've come from other places and they've seen American history through a different lens than maybe many of our staff members. And so it's always a very interesting conversation that honestly starts in probably first grade all the way up, where kids are able to share their unique experiences because they have not been in the country. They're not like fifth or sixth generation students here.
Right. And I would just also say that in addition to teaching thematically, you cannot leave out the importance of time and chronology. It's one of the central ideas of history. So I would always have teachers maintain a timeline. So you may be talking about something that happened in the 1700s, like Shays Rebellion, but then you got 2021. You want to put them both on that timeline so students can see that, because perhaps one of the hardest things to teach is time and chronology. I always tell teachers in professional development, I said, do you remember when you were a little kid and it took 2 years for Christmas to come? And now, and now Christmas comes every 6 months. My husband gets on me because I won't put Christmas things away. He's like, well, when are you going to put that away? I said, no, it's going to be Christmas in a few months. Don't worry about it. Where you are on that timeline, time either speeds up or slows down for you.
And I worked with a teacher who we put a big timeline around her room, and then she taught social studies through the themes and topics. And then the students would actually place up across. And what was fascinating about that is you visually get to see all of these revolutions, all of these rebellions, all of the, and you see everything coming up there, and it all comes together by the end of the year. Now you can sit down and write a retrospective of, taking a look at this. In what we ended up doing was now take a look at the whole year and take a look at it through the retrospective of whatever you want, the arts, the political angle, religion, pick a different level of theme to go through.
I definitely think
in
if
Usher's case, I would say that you might want to have multiple timelines because you have kids from different countries. So you want to be saying, this was going on. One of my favorite books is a book called The World in 1492. It's a kid's book.
Yes.
But it's essentially saying, we teach 1492 like everybody was sitting in front of their TV waiting to see if he was going to make it. Oh, is he going to get there? Oh, that's like it's a moon landing. But the truth of the matter is people were doing other things around the world in 1492. So that book looks at Great Zimbabwe. It looks at Central and South America. It looks at Europe. Different things were going on in the world in 1492, and we need to help our kids get out of this tunnel vision.
Well, I love the idea of layers of timelines that students are. So this was happening over here, but what else was happening around the world?
Yes.
I think if we continue, I love the idea of teaching thematically, but I think when we start to do that, that's when we get that pushback from society, because that's going to change the narrative. That's going to change the way that we view history. And we know that history is very rarely seen in an Afrocentric viewpoint. We talk about people who claim this country, but when we think about it, we know that this country was built on the back of Asian Americans, African Americans, but we don't talk about that. We don't talk about the near genocide of those cultures that it took to build this country. And when we start talking about that slavery, we start talking about that's sort of glossed over. It always amazes me how we can encapsulate slavery in such a small unit of teaching and then just move over it. We talk about slavery and then we just move on.
Right.
Slavery is a large component of how this country was made. So not to have that time spent on it, not to tell how this happened, not to tell how big of an issue this is in the life of African Americans, even today, how that history has affected us. I think it's a travesty. So once again, yeah, teaching thematically is great, but I think if we did it, we would get the greatest pushback from those that have written history, that really don't want to see that.
Right.
And Dr. White, you can't do any of this without a knowledgeable teacher.
Right.
So one of the reasons why people don't want to do it is because the textbooks are not organized this way, and they can't rely on staying a chapter ahead. They have to have deep knowledge to be able to teach in this way, and that's our challenge.
Well, and I thought it was a travesty that so I'm 65 years old. I was thinking when you said before, Gloria, about the percentage of people who marched, I was like, I was only 8. I was watching them on TV, When we think about what happened, in my early teaching days, we shifted away. It used to be that we taught all the different subjects and we had tests on all of them. And then all of a sudden we started testing just ELA and math. And then what started to happen is schools would work more ELA and math. And even clients that I worked with were saying, well, we're teaching extra classes of ELA and math. And we're really, we do social studies and science like every other day. And I'm like, oh, I don't think that's going to be good. And then I guess, science kind of reared its head and said, wait a second, don't forget about us. So we started testing science in a lot of states, but we still were leaving out social studies. And I look at it and I say that I think, where we are today, like we deserve it, because we drop significant teaching of social sciences and social studies and history in school. And we need to get back to that, because I'm a big fan of problem-based learning and do a lot of work in redesigning instruction through problem-based learning. And I just think you start with social studies and science, pull out real world problems, and through it, you can teach your ELA and your math, because those are important skill sets. But I feel like we can't, we've done ourselves a disservice by shying away from social studies. And when you're only going to teach social studies a little bit, we'll teach an hour and a half of ELA, but we're going to teach 20 minutes of social studies every other day or once a week or whatever it works out. Right. I feel like, of course, you're only giving this short shrift. Here's a little bit, it's like the history of the world in 2 minutes.
For sure.
All right, now I actually have to stop because it's time for me to take my break in here. I want to go back to, there was a question from Adam Schnitzler, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago. He was asking the group if you had any reading materials, suggestions, whatever. And I saw that a couple of people actually listed books. So what I'm going to ask the directors backstage is to kind of capture those. And then when we come back, maybe we can talk more about if there are any other resources that you think teachers could use. But right now, I need to stop for what's in your mug. I thank the International Broadcast Media TV for having this show on the air. And if you have not been to ibmtv.tv, it's worth going. We just got a whole new website up and lots of shows. There's about 80 shows that you can watch on anything you ever wanted to learn. So I encourage you to go there. I thank Ankit, Nick, Kim, who are the producers of this whole network. And then I also want to thank, I know that Gwen Fahn is behind the scenes with us as one of the directors, helping out our directors. So we very much appreciate everyone who is here to put this show together. All right, so my mug, I decided to pull up, let me see if I can get this in here. Now, I understand that this has some of those names that we see.
It's got all of them.
Hey, don't give me a hard time. So what I like about it is that I like the fact that we attach them all to, what they contributed to our journey, if you will. And I see it ends with inspire like Obama. So I would like to add to that, break glass like Kamala. So kind of just, add that one. And what I am drinking today, if we're talking about Black History Month, and we're going to go back to Roots of Africa, because it is one of my favorite coffees here. It is the Zimbabwe blend from the Bhutan Coffee Company, where I used to live and be able to go and hang out at the Bhutan Coffee Company drinking my coffee. So that's what's in my mug. Felicia, what's in your mug?
So I have, don't laugh, This is my Star Trek mug.
Oh,
It has everything I learned from Star Trek: go boldly, hail on all frequencies, be logical, resistance is not futile, and it has some other things. Now, if you're not a Star Trek fan, you probably think I'm crazy, and that's okay
Yeah.
because I'm fine with it. The reason why it is my favorite, one of my favorite mugs, is because it kind of reminds me to go and try new things and just be bold and do it. And Star Trek was all about going into unexplored lands out in space, something I would love to do. So that's my favorite mug. And inside it, it is chai tea latte. I drink a lot of tea and a lot of coffee. So that's my choice for today.
very nice. And, I never watched Star Trek. I don't know what rock I was living under, but I have a group of friends who go to the Boot and Coffee Company with me, and they are all Trekkies. So what they have done, so when we think about again,
There we go. Yeah, that's us.
well,
Trekkies, we are.
I go nanu. So, what they have done though is when we talk about what have we gained from the pandemic, we get together every Saturday night and we started watching episodes of Star Trek from the beginning. So they are teaching me, and I love that it's all new to me, but they're like literally quoting the line
Scene
that's
for
going to
scene.
come next. Yeah. All right, Frederick, what's in your mug?
Okay. My favorite mug is my dad mug. And as you can see, it 100% strength, 150% guarding, and all of these other characteristics here. I love this cup because it reminds me what my first job is. My first job is being a father, protecting my son. Everything that I do, from my work to the way I entertain, all go back to making sure that this world is a perfect place for my son to grow up in. My son went to the middle school that I am principal at. And then I was the assistant principal here. But I truly believe that if you are in education, you should create an environment that you would have your own child at. I chastise those individuals that teach or are in administration and they wouldn't let their child attend their school. So it means, what have you not done to make that a good environment for somebody else's child? So that's definitely my job as a dad. And once again, I'm drinking green tea because it's my wife, who's an author, who's probably on this call, Jamie Fowler White, who would tell me that I need it for energy, and it's sort of kind of healthy instead of the soda that I would normally be drinking. So.
I'm seeing some of the comments coming up from the audience. There's a lot of tea in the audience tonight.
Yeah,
a lot of tea.
Where are my coffee drinkers?
Not at this hour.
It's too late today.
Gloria, what is in your mug?
So the mug that I'm using really underscores my nerdiness. Oops, not showing up well. It's
but that is so cool, though. It looks really cool.
Yeah, it is the morning edition with Bob Edwards from NPR. Now, Bob hasn't been the host since 2004, so it's been a while. And I am drinking, I'm going to join the tea craze, and I am drinking South African Red Rubles tea, because it's kind of just, it's kind of energizing. And so
it is, it's a good tea.
So, Dr. Sulla, before all of this is over with you and your Star Trek watching, you will learn about the trouble with tribbles.
Absolutely.
And then you'll know what being a principal is like.
The Star Trek family is vast. That's all I can say. We're just out here, aren't we?
What you're saying is I need to do a show on it.
Yeah, you do.
You can invite me back. I'd be happy to be there.
How Trekkies learn.
That's it.
Hey, what's in your mug?
So today I have my mug that I got at a shop in Ireland. Pre-COVID, I love to travel. Like, I like to collect stamps on my passport if I can, which I think is just great on perspectives, because as to some points earlier, like, this is the dominant knowledge that we get here, but when you go to other countries and other places, their lens on history is very different. And so it's always interesting to gather all of those perspectives as well. And I'm from the South. So I'm drinking just regular old sweet tea. I just put it in a mug.
Sweet tea.
Sweet tea, because
they would say, is there any other kind?
there's
Exactly.
not. If you go in the South, they're just like, they'll bring it sweet. They don't ask which kind.
Well, I feel so blessed to have this show, and the fact that every week the guests that come on this show are so interesting and the conversations are so exciting. And I always say, as I get to the end of the show, like, but I need another 2 hours. And I feel like I'm looking at the clock going, 5:46? How did that happen? So today, kick off the last 12 minutes or so of our show.
Yay. So we've had a lot of great conversation, and I think to a point earlier,
mockery.
A little bit of mockery.
A little bit
Literally had the 10 people that came to mind in my mind.
Right.
There's some other good ones in there that weren't.
Yes, but the perspective, I think, is important, and I appreciated what you were speaking about earlier, Dr. White, in regards to that shifting the dominant paradigm, and I think that that's going to be the call really to action of like, how do you shift that dominant narrative? So how can we, what are some smaller steps that we can take to just start to shift, that dominant paradigm about the dominant story, that we always hear? Like, what is it that we can start to do, or parents can start to do, or the community even can start to do, to really start to shift that dominant narrative?
Mm-hmm.
I think that we can begin by not hiding who we really are. We always say that when things happen, oh, this is not my country. This is not the country. No, this is exactly who we are. We are the country where we watched George Floyd be murdered on camera. We are the country where we saw Breonna Taylor get murdered. We are the country where rioters stormed the Capitol. We have to dive deep and have open conversations about who we really are and how we change who we are. Mm-hmm. How do we tell our scholars, our kids, to embrace this picture of America and change it, and stop letting our generations and the generation before us lay out what America should be. I never want to hear people say, oh, I just want things to get back to normal. Normal for who?
Yeah.
That your normal definitely is not what I want to return to. I want us to keep progressing. I want us to embrace that change. I want us to, if it takes us having a revolution in order to realize that there is a lack of equity in our world, then that's what it takes. So let's embrace that and have those discussions. Let's talk about why those statues should not be there. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about why we should march in the streets. I think all of those things are definitely important, and we shouldn't be scared to have those conversations.
For sure, for sure. What about at like the elementary level? What does that look like when you're thinking about your school, Felicia, and talking to, you got primary kids? How do we start for them as well?
We do have primary kids who understand quite a bit more about what's going on in the world right now than you might think. Mm-hmm. From a very young age, I've had very interesting conversations with even my own children who are 6 and 8 years old. And so I think it's really, for the elementary student, you want to start with asking them how they feel about what's going on, about what their interpretations are. What connections do they see between what's happening now and what we've been learning about in school and what happened back in the past? So those conversations are already happening at the elementary level. And then, like I said, I think it's really important to help children they have a lot of knowledge. They don't come to us as blank tablets, as people used to say. They have their own experience. They have their own background knowledge. It may not be the same. It won't be the same as mine, but it's by listening to all of the different perspectives that we can build a better future for ourselves and for our students. And so I don't think it's very different at the elementary level. Obviously, you don't go into the detail of the really terrible things that are happening with young children, but they know things are happening. They see the news with their parents. They hear it in the neighborhoods. They hear about the things that don't get reported on the news. And so it's really giving them the space to have the conversation and then guiding that conversation to, well, what are you going to do about it? What's going to be different for you? Because you are our future. So how can we make this better for other people? And I think that when I look at where we are as a country right now, there have been a lot of hard things that have happened over the past year, but a lot of it's really not new. There are a lot of people who have shown up new to the party who have just realized they're going on, but for others, this is not new. We've known about this for a very long time. And so now that we have this momentum of everyone that's really starting to pay attention to the new buzzword of equity, what can we do with that? How do we make things more equitable for all of our students? How do we make sure that Black history and the history contributions that everyone has made are not just taught to Black people, but to everyone? Because as we said earlier, it's part of our history. And so I think it's really in the conversation with the younger students and the projects that you assign and making sure that you're painting a well-rounded picture of what's going on and what there is to access. And I think something that someone said earlier about, it does require work of the teachers because it's not currently written into the curriculum, probably in most states. The beauty of the internet is that there are ways to get that information that didn't exist when I started in education back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, you had to still pick up a book to find all of the things that you wanted. And so we're in not a great place in terms of the pandemic, but we're in a great place where we have so much more access to technology and access to information. You just have to want it. It's there. You just have to go after it.
For sure. I totally agree. And it's important that I think a theme that I'm hearing is it has to be like, it's all of our history. So it just should be integrated. The narrative should be told as such. And I think that's where, because the buzzword that wonderful Gloria coined of being culturally relevant and responsive, it takes all of those pieces. We need to make sure it's integrated. It's not, we're going to learn it in a silo and then we're going to put it away in our bucket of theme things that we'll bring out again next year. But it should be something that's fluid and conversed throughout. Would you agree, Dr. Billings?
Yes, and in fact, Shanae, one of the cheat sheets that teachers have is the fact that the children and young adult authors have not shied away from the topics. I did a workshop with some parents of young children, and I was just shocked at how many more books are out there. There's a book by Kenneth Braswell called Daddy, There's a Noise Outside. And these are children asking about the protests in the street. What's going on out there? So it's at a children's level. What I found, however, is that even though our children's authors are willing to take on hard topics, and Dr. White, there is a book by Sharon Flake called The Skin I'm In for young adults. They'll take on those hard topics. It's that our teachers who shy away from it. So even a book that to me is as beautifully written and powerful as The Watson Family Goes to Birmingham, summer 1963, I have actually seen teachers shy away from what really is the crux of the issue and really focus on things like the mother's parenting style. Even books that you might think don't have anything to do with race. All of my children are adults, even actually all of my grandchildren are adults at this point, but they've all had Isra Jack Keats' book, A Snowy Day. And it seems like such an innocuous book. But if you read the history of Keats writing that book, first of all, it's the first mainstream book in America with a Black protagonist. And Keats's interviews, he says, I always knew that this kid belonged in the book. I just didn't know where. Now, I have looked at over 100 lesson plans on Ezra Jack Keats' Snowy Day, because everybody's taught it or used it, not one of them takes up the concept of race. Not at one time does a kindergarten, first, second grade teacher say, well, what do you notice about Peter? Because it's not central to the narrative, but the visuals there.
Right.
And yet we're afraid to take it up. So I would just say that they have resources. The question is whether or not people will be bold enough to use those resources.
Yeah, and you have to find those districts and those communities that are not afraid to allow teachers to do so. I think teachers are normally nervous about bringing in those sources because that goes against the mainstream thinking. Once again, their version of history, their version of the world is sometimes challenged when we start talking about the influence that people of color have had on history. So it's not just the teachers being bold enough, but those teachers also thinking, well, I want to keep a job also. So it's sort of scary that, we're sort of forced into that corner.
Right.
Of being rebellious when we want to teach actual history that pertains to us.
So, and Dr. White, I'm glad you made the point about not going back to, quote, normal.
Right.
I've been saying this since March, and that is our students, and we all are actually in the midst of 4 pandemics. 4. Of course, is the COVID-19 the reason why we're in this sort of remote environment, but there is also the pandemic of white supremacy. Yeah. It doesn't just live in the US. I have colleagues in the UK and in France and in Canada, all of whom have said, you know what, we got this same mess going on here. That's the second one. The third pandemic is the coming economic collapse. This is not sustainable, what we're doing right now. We keep trying to patch it up, but people not making a living wage. People have been laid off. Over 800,000 women have left the workforce. And then that fourth pandemic is environmental catastrophe. We could call it a hoax if you want to, but my kids live on the West Coast, and they told me what the air quality was like this summer. Those folks who live in that Gulf Coast region, you know how many storms you had, enough to go through the regular alphabet and on into iota in the Greek alphabet.
Right.
And Dr. White, know the iotas always last, right? I should say that.
I was about to say, I will not get. I will not.
Yeah. I went to Morgan State. I went to Morgan State, so I love them. But what I'm saying is, our students are all in those 4 pandemics.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Some of us have rode this storm out on a yacht, a luxury liner. Right. But there are people who are holding on to a piece of driftwood. And if we don't pay, and so the notion of going back to normal, no, because normal was my kids being suspended more than anybody else, being expelled, dropping out, being in the lowest reading groups, never getting into AP and honors classes, you name it. The Indian author Arundhati Roy says the pandemic is a portal. Back to your Star Trek here. And so we can get on the other side of this portal. We can either take all this stuff that we've already done, all this racism and greed and avarice and, smoky skies and bad water. We can take that with us, or we can go into this portal with light luggage, right?
Right.
And into a new world. A world that we will be willing to fight for. So that means we have to think differently, not just about teaching Black history, but teaching in general.
Absolutely.
This is an opportunity. I don't think we're going to get this opportunity again. Amen. So I don't want us, I think it's Winston Churchill who said it, and then Rahm Emanuel stole it. We should never, ever squander a crisis. Right. Yeah. So here we are in the midst of crisis. Let's take advantage of it. Let's make sure that we are using the opportunity. And I think one of the biggest things on our list is, what are we going to do about the social, emotional, and mental health needs, not just of our children, but of the adults who are in those buildings with them.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Sounds like we need another show.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
I think
already
we could
I
definitely
can't
go on
believe
for another hour.
No, right?
Yeah.
So I hope you will all come back on the show. The beautiful thing about being on internet TV is, unlike being on the television set, there's not another show that butts up against us. So I get to go over a little bit, and that's what I'm gonna use that license right now to say, give me a 30-second, response. What challenge can we give to teachers? What encouragement? What message of courage can we give them to think differently about how we're approaching Black history? And I'm going to pick up with something that you had said, Felicia, that Black history doesn't begin with slavery. And I know that one of the things that I have, gotten myself to do is keep pushing myself beyond what we think to be true. Most people, when I ask who are the early philosophers, they say Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, which were around 300 BC. Well, you know who the earliest philosopher was? Imhotep from Africa, 2500 BC. But unless you're willing to go and dig a little deeper to find out that there were so many influential Black people that came before, you're just going to keep taking the lens of history that you were taught and carry it forward. So my challenge to teachers is, as soon as you're thinking you know the answer, dig a little bit deeper. Shanae, what advice do you have for teachers?
My challenge is to use this internet and this availability we have and start searching for stuff. People have to also do their own personal work. It's not up to the one Black friend, it's not up to that one Black educator at the school, your Black principal. Like, everyone needs to do also their own work, because we all have to own it in order to change it. It can't just be on the onus of people of color.
Frederick, what is your word of advice or encouragement?
I guess it's more of letting teachers know to stop telling people that the world has changed and it's the fault of our current politicians and things. If the world hasn't changed, it's just come into the light. We now just see clearly what we are. We haven't changed. This didn't just pop out. Racism didn't just start. We didn't just become a part of history. We've always been there. Racism has always been there. So acknowledge that these things have existed and that these things are going to carry on until we make that change. And we have to be brave enough to make that change, to give our scholars the needed information to embrace this world. And I won't say a new world, but this new look at the world that we have.
Yeah,
For sure.
Felicia, your advice?
I'm thinking of a couple of things. One is that I would challenge my fellow educators to reflect about their own possible biases and ideas about the world that they grew up in. But also, don't be afraid. It has been a scary topic for people for decades and decades. It's okay if you have no idea where to start. I think the best thing to do is say, all right, I'm new to this and I want to learn. And so don't be afraid to engage with your students, find out what they want to know about, engage with them and see what it is that they need that you might be able to provide. And also, again, to second everyone else, do some research and even just start in one place. If you're an elementary teacher, start with looking at some picture books that show more diverse representation of kids, and just find a place to start. Don't be afraid and feel like you're going to mess it up or say the wrong thing. Start and engage, and you'll get better and better as you go along.
For sure.
And then I will get the words of the incomparable trailblazer, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billing.
So I think what I would like to say is none of us is a clairvoyant. And I tell teachers all the time, you have no idea who's in your classroom. You just don't. Do you actually think Martin Luther King's third grade teacher went, "Oh my God, there's Martin Luther King in this"? No, it was, "Oh gosh, it's Martin King. He's a preacher's kid. Oh, I know this is going to be a mess," right? We don't know who's in there. And a good example for me is 4 years ago, I sit on the national panel. I'm one of the 3 judges for the U.S. National Youth Poet Laureate. And I got to choose the 2017, the first one that we had. It turned out that there was a young lady with some really good entries, but the one that we chose was a young woman named Amanda Gorman. We didn't know she was going to be standing up on that stage.
Right.
So teach as if Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Thurgood Marshall, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Harriet Tubman, Soldier, teach like they might be in that room.
Yes.
They just might be.
Yes. Yes.
Well, Felicia, Frederick, Gloria, I can't thank you enough for being my guests tonight. And Shanae, as always, an amazing co-host. I'm telling you, we could go on and on. If you guys are willing, we'll do a part 2 and come back to continue more, perhaps after Black History Month, so we can kind of keep it going. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys backstage. Love you. And to my audience, thank you so much for all of your comments. Just so you all know, this is recorded. You can go back to the same link, but it takes a day or 2 before the comments end up coming up. So if you want to watch to get to see all of the comments, give it a day or 2 and then come back. And I always watch the shows again, and it's amazing. So I hope you'll do that. And I hope you'll join us next week when we are going to talk about how leaders learn. And so, as always, we end with the kids of IDE, the children whose parents work here, and they have put a little something together for us. So see you next week. Thanks for being here at Learning Unwrapped.
Did you know Lucy Stanton became the first Black woman in America to earn a 4-year college degree?
Rapunzel, Marshmallow, Maria, Tiana, Moana, Strawberry, Cece, Froggy, Sala, and I love all my dogs.
Did you know in 1908, after winning the 4x400 meter relay, John Taylor became the first African American to win a gold medal in the Olympics?
Do you know Floyd Norman? Well, you do know Sleeping Beauty, The Jungle Book, and Toy Story. He was the first African American animator at Disney Studios. He's such a great inspiration, and he still works there today.
Did you know in 2012, Gabby Douglas became the first Black gymnast to win the individual all-around title? Did you know in July 1777, Vermont became the first colony to ban slavery?
Black history is global history.
Thanks for watching Learning Unwrapped. Tune in next week to talk about how leaders learn. Do you think my principal is going to watch this? I hope so.